I have a favorite trail probably for a couple weeks at a time. And then I learn the flow of it. And while it's still fun, it maybe stops giving me that thrill that you get from riding new and unfamiliar terrain. So I'm always kind of looking for the new to me trails. And good thing out here is that there's so many of them that you pretty much touch new to you trail every single ride, which makes pretty much every ride a good one.
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. I'm Matthew Piaro. You just heard from cross-country rider Hayley Smith. The Ontario mountain biker was talking about the trails around Victoria, where she and her husband, who is also her Norco factory teammate, Andrew L'Esperance, have been since early January. It's a trend you can see with many Canadian mountain bikers this year. They moved to Victoria to train for the season ahead because international travel is not an easy option right now. Smith is heading abroad soon, however. In about mid-April, she and L'Esperance will go to Europe to start racing. The big targets are the World Cup races in Germany and the Czech Republic. Results there could affect selection for the Olympics. While the chances of Smith representing Canada in Tokyo this summer are good, nothing is totally certain. In January, Smith published a story about her struggles with mental health. In the past, she's spoken about the problems she faced as a teenager and how, for the most part, she overcame them. But in 2020, her struggles grew more and more serious. Every time I've spoken with Smith, I'm always struck by how articulate she is about mental health. She's honest and insightful, even when she's overwhelmed with emotion, which you will hear in this interview. So get ready to tackle some big topics, as well as some big jumps, with mountain biker Hayley Smith. Hayley Smith. It seems as if all this country's top mountain bikers are in Victoria right now. How many familiar faces do you run into on your average ride?
To be honest, I don't see other people all that often, which is funny because the island is not very big. The trail systems, though expansive, are pretty tight, so you'd expect to see people, but I haven't managed to run into too many people, actually.
What drew you and your husband and Norco factory teammate Andrew L'Esperance out to Victoria in January?
So I've been coming out to Victoria in the winters since 2014. So this has been my winter base for a long time now. As Andrew and I started dating, he began to join me out here on the West Coast in the winters. And then this year, just because of the pandemic and the fact that it's not safe or responsible to be moving around too much, we decided that we would come out on a full year term, I guess. So in January, we packed up the truck and we drove across the country so that we could have a stable base for the coming competitive and training year.
Do you see many of your Norco factory teammates? I know you mentioned you don't see too many people on rides, but are you in contact with your fellow teammates very often?
Until recently, it was not okay to gather outside in groups here. Recently, they've relaxed the restrictions for elite national team athletes, and also just you can gather in groups of 10 outdoors now. So in the last couple of weeks, we've been able to begin riding with our teammates again, which has been so awesome and really injected a shot of energy and motivation into our training. So for the last few weekends, Lesby and I have been riding with Pete D and Sean Fincham and Quinton as well. Our other teammates are on the West Coast, but dispersed in different cities. So it's been fun to ride with those guys again.
What's your favorite trail?
This question is always so hard to answer. To be honest, I give this answer quite a bit, and it's just a new trail. Like I have a favorite trail probably for a couple weeks at a time, and then I learn the flow of it, and while it's still fun, it maybe stops giving me that thrill that you get from riding new and unfamiliar terrain. So I'm always kind of looking for the new to me trails. And good thing out here is that there's so many of them that you pretty much touch new to you trail every single ride, which makes pretty much every ride a good one.
Is there a trail that you once maybe didn't like so much, didn't it didn't jive with you, but now you see it in a different light?
Oh, definitely. There's so many of those out here because the first year I came out, I was underskilled for the terrain, and because of that, I was scared all the time. Like every single trail ride was white knuckle for me. And it's just, I think once you develop those hangups on trails, it takes a while to get over them, even though your skill level has reached or surpassed what is required to ride the trail. You still kind of have that historical fear of it in your brain. So yeah, there's some trails out here where only this year really have my guts and my confidence risen to match the skill level I have. So for example, there's a trail out here called Hot Cherry, and I used to be pretty scared every time going down it. I would dread it a little bit. As I'm climbing up to it, I'm wondering if I really should, or maybe I can peel off and go down the west side instead of the east side of the range and not have to hit it. But now I actually enjoy it. So there's a few trails like that where I've started to come into my confidence a little bit more, and the riding is thus a lot more fun.
I wanted to ask more about your technical skills and development, because we spoke in 2018, and at that time you had a tabletop jump in your backyard. Since then, I've also heard that you've also ridden the trail out there, Organ Donor, which is a jump trail that's recently redesigned. So can you sort of give me that contrast from your backyard tabletop jump to hitting these trails in Victoria now with new confidence?
Yeah, the backyard tabletop jump is actually a really funny one. It was this little, a gap jump that my dad built for me. So it was the run-in was downhill, and then it was essentially like two packed in stacks of logs that created with a hole in the middle, about a 4 or 5 foot hole. So very small. And then we had a door that you could place in the gap just to give it some visual, give myself visual confidence. It's the visual hole that really scares me. Anyways, the first time I hit the gap, I was so scared that I came in too hot, and I completely overshot the landing. Like I didn't hit the landing. So I just launched myself super far and ended up crashing. But I got back on the horse, and eventually we worked up to removing the door and hitting it at the appropriate speed. And that I've had to take that sort of strategy, if you will, to pretty much every different or increasing level of difficulty of jump that I hit. I don't necessarily have to put a door in the middle, but if I come up to for example, there are a few jumps on Organ Donor that are pretty big and scary for me. And I'm still at that point where I can't just send it. I have to work up to it a little bit. So I'll try to find a jump that's, maybe 60% of the size. And then I'll maybe go to 80% of the size, but it won't have a gap in the middle. It will be a tabletop, or it'll be a low risk gap where if you case it, it doesn't matter. And then eventually I'll get up the courage to go off the big one. And yeah, I've just learned that that's my process. I have to be pretty gradual with myself. And it's kind of like massaging the courage out of me rather than just hucking myself off something.
This technical progression is a necessity, as I understand it. Like, it's nice to get rad and everything, but the World Cup courses require this level of technical abilities. Is that correct?
Yes, for sure. You definitely want to show up to a World Cup over skilled for what's going to be asked of you. Just because with the nerves and the stress that come with a World Cup, it can make riders squirrely. So you want to be over prepared essentially. And, if you watch Red Bull, you can see that the technical demands of our World Cup racing they're getting really high. We're doing stuff that I don't even know if I could, go back 5 years and be on a steeper geometry hardtail with no dropper post. I don't even know if we could really ride that stuff that we're now being asked to do. I'm probably exaggerating a little bit there, but it would have been very challenging. And so I think that just the technical requirements of World Cup racing are getting higher and higher, and we have to push every year. You have to be able to reach that new level because, we don't know what the courses will be this year. But one thing is for certain is that we're going to show up, and there will be between 2 and 5 features on the World Cup tracks that are limit pushers, skill pushers, and we have to be ready for it.
You've been with Norco for almost 10 years. This is your 10th year. Tell me the secret to such a long athlete-team relationship.
Oh, honestly, I think it's just the attitude of the company and their value on family and relationships and people first, as opposed to performance first. I owe so much of that to our manager, Kevin Haviland. He is really the heart and soul of our program. And he made it so clear from day one that he's about developing people and developing relationships, and the performances follow. You see other professional teams where there's higher turnover in athletes, and I think there's a lot of pressure on those teams. I'm just speculating here, but I think there's a lot of pressure to perform. And if you're not getting those top results, then you're it seems that you may be cut loose. And with Norco, it's just, there's such a deep relationship there, and they care so much about who you are and what you bring to the table outside of racing as well. I'm lucky that I was hired by a team that had great people, so it makes it really easy to foster good relationships and be friends and feel like family. And I mean, I guess that's probably why I'm still here. This is my 10th season. It's Lespi's 11th season. Our manager, Kevin Haviland, has been with the Norco factory team since its inception. And yeah, I think it's just about the relationships.
Norco, the company, the bike company, recently refreshed its brand. What does that mean for you?
They basically, redid their whole look, changed the logo. They formalized the vibe of the company. And for me, it honestly, one, I think the new look is really great. I like the aesthetic. And I was joking yesterday that I'm very happy because my Instagram feed will now have a lot more green in it, which is a very soothing color to me. So I'm stoked on that aesthetic. But also it's just, what I just talked about, the relationships and the vibe and the attitude that you bring to the team. I feel that the outward brand, the outward image of Norco is now really in alignment with that, with our connection to the trails and to the earth and to each other and to just like the root and the heart of what we do. So I feel that the image really captures that. And I mean, practically, it doesn't change all that much for us, except our kit and our bike design, like the aesthetics of the bike design, not the actual engineering of the bike design. But yeah, so it doesn't change all that much. It just makes it feel like we are now outwardly representing what we inwardly feel as a team and as a company. And that's kind of refreshing to be in alignment that way.
As a Norco athlete, you give feedback to the company on their bikes. What's it like being, in effect, part of the development process?
It's really cool. And I think I'm on a team with 2 engineers. 2 of our athletes are engineers, and the other athletes are also all very technically minded. And I don't have that sort of technical jargon or background to describe in engineering terms what I experience when I'm riding a bike. That being said, I bring a lot of, I think, maybe more artistry in how I describe things. I'm a little bit more, I think I come at it more like a dancer from my background. And it's really cool because the engineers understand what I'm saying, even though I'm saying it in, regular person speak as opposed to engineering person speak. And somehow they can take my feedback and make it into real life, which is really cool. And it's also just, it's cool to have a little piece of that legacy, to be involved in it in some small way, so that, when I'm done racing, there's this physical product of something that I helped in a small way to make. And also it gives you a lot of confidence when you're racing on the World Cup and you know that the bike that you're riding has been designed based on your feedback. So that you're riding what's good for you, and you have utmost confidence that you're riding the best bike. So that's really helpful as well.
Can you give an example of dancerly feedback about a bike? I find that so interesting. I just wonder if you have an example.
I don't know if I could really put words into it, but I think people kind of fall into 2 categories of how they describe training and riding. And equipment. And one of them is very analytical and it's very technical, and it involves discussions on pressures and what the suspension is doing and the angles and all that stuff. And then I think there's people who maybe describe it in a more of an abstract way. And for me, that's where I fall. I almost think of riding like choreography. Like I feel it. If I were to learn a new skill, if you told me the specifics of exactly what I have to do, like bend your arms at 90 degrees and then do this and then throw your bike this far forward, I wouldn't be able to do that. But if you explain how it should feel to me, then I can put that into action. That's the same thing, I think, the same attitude I bring to bike feedback when I have that opportunity to do so. So yeah, I don't know if I could give you a specific example other than that my feedback and my riding progression are based mostly on feel, on sort of kinesthetic feel, as opposed to the intellectual nature of what we're doing and what we're riding.
Before we continue with my conversation with Hayley Smith, I want to tell you about this episode's sponsor, Etnies. The shoe company got its start in skateboarding 35 years ago. About 3 years ago, it started working with freestyle phenomenon Brandon Semenuk. The rider has put a lot of thought into Etnies mountain bike shoes, including the Semenuk Pro shoe. Starting at the bottom, the shoe has the Formula G sole. It's a compound that's 2 times grippier than standard rubber. Its geohex tread pattern works in conjunction with the pins on your pedal, giving you lots of options when you're finding the best foot placement. There's an ankle shield for extra protection from your bike frame and gears. These Etnies shoes might not have you flying down the trails exactly like Semenuk does, but they will help you to ride at your best. Now, back to Hayley Smith. In January, you published an article about how the pandemic has affected your mental health. As a teenager, you developed anorexia, which came out of anxiety-related issues. Your struggles with mental health were largely well managed throughout your late teens and into your mid-20s. I remember, though, when we spoke in early 2019, you mentioned that leading into the World Cups that year, you had noticed thought patterns reminiscent of those that you had during your early teenage years. They were creeping in, but again, seemed well managed. But then, a year ago, the pandemic started, your mental health was affected. You don't call it a relapse, but you say old habits and thought patterns returned. For many people, the pandemic has affected their mental health in various ways. For you, you had a system in place for your mental well-being. What did the pandemic reveal to you about your system?
It's a very good question. I think, first of all, I learned that my system was sufficient for daily stressors and it was sufficient for personal stressors. It was not sufficient to handle or to allow me to manage the massiveness of a pandemic. I think for me, the pandemic brought a lot of existential worries and a lot of, I would say anxiety and stress and even a little bit of depressive feelings just based on the state of humanity and of the stability of our lives on Earth. And I felt really overwhelmed by that. So the coping strategies that I had developed and the management strategies were sufficient to handle things that were happening in my own personal sphere. So, fatigue is something that really brings out these old thought patterns for me. And my management strategies were sufficient to handle training fatigue. What they were not sufficient to handle was extreme emotional fatigue because of the daily, the daily worry of, are we all going to get sick? And are we going to descend into chaos? And all of those things that my brain went to. So it was just that, I suppose the biggest thing I learned was that it was too much. It was just too much, and I was not able to handle it. I was not prepared to handle it. That's probably the biggest thing. And then what else did the pandemic reveal? I think it also showed me, though, that my coping strategies are the right strategies. They just needed to be fortified and made a little bit more robust. And I needed to lean into them a bit more, a bit earlier on, instead of, this could be a very long conversation, but I pushed my feelings down about the pandemic and about everything early on because I didn't know how to process it, as I'm sure most people didn't really know how to conceptualize or process it. And so these things piled up and then caught up with me. And I was just, at that point, I was drowning already. So I couldn't keep my head above water.
What are maybe one or two ways you adapted or bolstered your system for the current climate?
When I came home from those World Cups that we had in October, we had obviously a mandatory 2-week quarantine. And that's the first time I've ever taken 2 weeks off of the bike since I started riding. The most I'd ever taken off was probably like 3 or 4 days. So first of all, those 2 weeks off where I was able to actually physically recover. We train a lot and we're always, for the most part, under some degree of physical fatigue. So the first thing that I would say helped me improve my strategies or improve their efficacy was just being rested, having that like physical energy that I'd been missing for a while. I would say that answer kind of snowballs in that at this point, because I'd been having, I do think it was a relapse because I'd relapsed with my eating disorder. I was very underfueled. And in those 2 weeks and in the ensuing month and a half, I also addressed the fueling side of the equation. So I got the physical rest from quarantine and from actually taking an off season, and then also improved my fueling. So those things combined helped to actually make me feel rested and to improve my baseline physical health. And if you're physically healthy, it's a lot easier to look after your mental health. And it's just, you just have a healthy springboard to take care of your brain from. So that was probably the biggest thing. And then, I mean, so many other little things like continuing working with a psychiatrist and continuing work with my sports psych and doing a lot of really important sort of soul searching about what matters to me and what I want my focus in daily life to be. And then I've had to revamp my mindfulness practice. So I actually stopped meditating formally for a very long time. And I added other types of mindfulness training into my day using affirmations and mindfulness thought stopping and mindful awareness throughout the day, as opposed to like a 15-minute meditation in the morning. And that's really helped me just develop more self-awareness and a little bit more compassion.
So instead of more focused meditation at, say, the start of the day, you have like more check-ins throughout the day to little more mindfulness breaks. Is that how it works? Yeah, like my sister actually made me, my sister is a yoga teacher, and she made me these affirmation cards that I have. So each little card has a saying on it. So that would be an affirmation that I would use in the morning. I would say it, and that would be kind of like my intention for the day. And I just try to say it enough times in the morning that it's in my brain, it's there, I'm aware of it. And then throughout the day, it will kind of like pop back into my brain, or I will, if I have a moment, I'll consciously bring it back into my brain. And then it allows me to have that check-in and to say, well, am I actually doing that? And then reset and move forward from there. I was recently speaking with Lucy Hempstead. She's a road rider who set a distance record on the trainer. She spoke about her struggles with mental health. She was a runner and a hurdler, but her pursuit of those disciplines were linked with anxiety and eating disorders. Now she rides road, and cycling doesn't seem to lead to the same difficult places that running had. For you, before you found mountain biking, you were serious about dance and hockey. Those pursuits, however, didn't seem to help in your recovery from anorexia and anxiety. mountain biking did. And I would love to say, look, everyone, cycling is clearly the best. Look at these two examples. Bikes make everything better. But of course, that's too facile. But the theory I want to put to you is that something seemed to go wrong, or at least not right, in your first forays into sport. I think we can say the same for Hempstead. But when you found your second sports, you could approach them in healthier, more positive ways. Now, maybe you can't speak to Hempstead's experience, but does that seem to work with your experience, that second time you're able to approach sport in a better way?
I don't think my first issues with my eating disorder and anxiety, they were not because of sport. I think sport is probably what kept me focused and actually alive for so long throughout that first struggle. I don't think that developing my eating disorder and my anxiety issues were related to my sport. I actually think that being so invested in sports throughout my adolescence was an attempt to manage the anxiety that I felt. They were an outlet for me right from the get-go. And of course, I obviously, when you're 12 years old, you're not overly mature. So I'm sure that I imbibed some performance pressure and some issues on that side of the spectrum from my early sport involvement. But whether it was music, whether it was dance, whether it was sports or academics, I would have found a way to insert my perfectionist attitudes, because that was how I was managing the overwhelming existential anxiety I felt. Without getting too deep into it, my issues all started because I couldn't reconcile mortality and why I was alive and what happens when I'm not alive anymore. And so all these outlets and this need to be perfect and need to be the best and need to be the most competitive, that was because it gave me some sense of purpose and control. So whatever the pursuit was, I think the outcome would not have changed. That being said, when I was released from the hospital after my biggest issues with anorexia, when I think I was 14, something needed to change. And if I had gone back to the same competitive pursuits like hockey and dance, I probably would not have been able to develop new ways of being, ways of thinking, new habits. And that's where cycling saved me, just because it was something new and something different that I could reinvent myself in, but also because cycling is very meditative and it can be an individual sport. That mental space it gave me was pivotal. Yeah, so I think, yes, I do think cycling is great for people that struggle with mental health issues because of that, because you get that space and it's meditation in motion. But at the same time, for the 4 years after my release from hospital, I still did dance and play hockey at a high level, and I loved it. But they weren't what healed me. I think my bike is what healed me.
That's a very good clarification. I can see how cycling can be meditative because I've, also found that sense out on the road. I imagine hockey is the opposite. Now, not to slag hockey, but I imagine it's the opposite because you don't go to it to be in your head. You go to it to work with a team and to shout at one another and to make things happen as a team. I imagine it's a very different process to be in.
So cycling is very meditative in that it's repetitive and you can easily find yourself and lose yourself in the moment at the same time. I think sports like hockey, or let's even say sprint track cycling, really high intense, aggressive, short bursts of energy. I think those pursuits they can also be meditative in a way because you do find that flow zone. And no matter what activity you're doing, when you find the flow zone, it's a magic form of a meditative state of being. But like you said, in hockey, you have that extra element of being on the ice with, that's really sad that I had to count that out with 5 other people, 5 other teammates at a time. So there's always, you can't fully lose yourself in yourself because you have to be part of a unit. But I mean, some of my best friends that I'm still connected to are from hockey, from the teams that I played on in high school. And it's a pretty unique experience when you can find flow with other people and you can feel that true team connection. And sometimes I think we're missing that in cycling. And yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said for being in a team environment and knowing others as well as you know yourself. And it's almost like a collective way of being in a collective mental psyche as opposed to just being individual.
Right. Like maybe I'm assuming the team pursuiters find that sort of team as one and even a lead out train on the road kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
In 2020, the cross-country season was compressed. Because of your mental health struggles, you didn't go into that season at your best. But what did you learn from that block of racing in 2020?
I think I learned that, wow, I just started to cry. That was a trigger for me. I think that I learned that I am very tough and it just comes out in different ways. I felt very, I was very sick. And in the first race, the first XC race of the 3 that we did, I just pulled over in the feed zone and I was like, my mechanic Scott was there and I was just like, Scott, I'm so ashamed, but I can't do this. And I felt very, I felt just pretty weak and, like I said, ashamed that I could not get my body to do what I needed it to do, and I couldn't get my brain to do what it needed to do. But toughness isn't always just what you can display in the moment. It's often, holy crap, whew. Toughness is often about how you rise after you've fallen, and I just learned that I can come back from stuff that I didn't think I could. So it was a pretty valuable lesson. And I mean, I also learned a lot about specific things like the importance of fueling. And if you want to race well, you have to be fueled. And so, you know, those actual practical things that could derail a career. But yeah, I think I learned a lot about what toughness means, I suppose, what being gritty and being tough means. And that I do have that in me. I just have to be a little nicer to myself and allow it to come out when I can get it to come out.
I find that really striking that you use the word shame, because that is such a heavy word. And I just think it really does convey, I think it conveys a lot. I mean, people can pull out of a race and you know, they pull out of a race, but that just shows how strongly it affected you and it weighed on you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've placed so much of my self-conceptualization, my self-identity on how hard I can push myself and what I can, just how hard I can dig. And so when you can't dig because there's nothing to dig into, it really challenges that my whole sense of self. And so in the moment, I felt like I was letting my team down. I was letting down all the people, my coaching and support team that had aimed to get me there, the people that had made this happen safely in a COVID environment and made immense personal sacrifices to make that racing trip happen. I felt like I was letting them all down, but I also, so that was kind of on top of this, just the feeling that I wasn't living up to who I thought I was. And that, I guess we do put a lot into racing and we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but it doesn't work all the time.
I'm just also fascinated with the balancing act of, like, you do need to demand stuff of yourself and to put pressure on yourself, but then there needs to be a point where you just let it go. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you need to say, okay, this is it for today. This is all I got. I'm going to try again tomorrow. You do. And I think that it's hard when you're racing, your whole entire racing season is in like
11 days or whatever it was, 10 days. So you don't have that time to reset and to focus on the next goal. With time and with maturity, you can develop the understanding that every race is not a test. Every race is not an assessment of your character. It's the trend of who you grow to be over time, and you're allowed to have bad days. It doesn't change who you are if you have a bad day, or if you DNF, or you pull out of a race or whatever. Yeah, it's the trend line that matters, and I think I've gone through periods in my career where I've really understood that on a deep level, and I've been able to shake off failures. And I've gone through periods like last fall where I just wasn't able to really like embody that understanding, and it really shook my understanding of who I was, and it didn't need to, because like I said, having a bad day does not mean you are a bad person or any less of a person or a bike racer. But I couldn't really I couldn't make myself believe that at the time.
As we speak, the Olympics are still scheduled to take place in July. The cross-country team is supposed to be announced in June. Are there any events between now and then that might affect selection?
Yes, there are 2 opportunities for someone to earn a spot above and beyond what has already been posted. So our results from 2019 count, and then these 2 races in May, the first 2 World Cups. So there's one in Germany and one in Czech Republic. Assuming they go ahead as planned, those are opportunities for people to post results that would count towards selection.
How do you feel about your chances of being selected to the Olympic team?
If I look at it on paper and I remove the emotion from it, I think I have a very good shot. That 3rd place I had in Nova Mesto in 2019 currently is the best result by a Canadian woman in the time period of selection. And we're likely to have 2 women's spots. And the way that the selection criteria is written is very black and white. It's just post the best result. It's very objective. So in order for me to not be selected, 2 other women would have to place better than 3rd place at those first 2 World Cups. So on paper, it looks good. But the thing is, athletes are, at least myself, I don't operate, by what looks good on paper. I pretty much always assume that I need to be better and that what I've posted is not going to be good enough. So, I can't control what any other rider does. I really can't even control my own placing, but I'm heading into those races hoping to be able to put up a good fight and to increase my chances any amount that I can.
In mid-March, the International Olympic Committee and the Chinese Olympic Committee announced that they would provide a made-in-China vaccine to Olympic athletes. Would you take them up on that offer if it comes before you are able to get vaccinated here in Canada?
First of all, I honestly I wasn't aware of that news until you told me, or I didn't know the specifics of it. I think if the vaccine is proven to be safe and we're not taking it away from frontline responders or people who are at a much higher risk than myself of serious illness, if they contract COVID, then yeah, I would take it. I think that the more people vaccinated, the better. Beyond my own personal desire to be vaccinated, the more people that have it and can either, don't transmit the disease or transmit a much less severe form of the disease. I think that's the goal. So if someone tells me I can get vaccinated and it's a safe vaccine, yes, I'm getting it.
Canadian swimmer Brent Hayden said he would go to the Olympics with or without a vaccine. So maybe this is the sort of opposite end, the opposite question. Would you go to the Olympics without a vaccination?
As long as I could go in a way that I was not putting other people at a higher safety risk than they just are in daily life, yes, I think I would go. I know I would go. We've gone through dress rehearsals with our condensed World Cup schedule and with many other professional sports getting back off the ground and shown that we can do this in a COVID safe way. So I mean, there's always going to be some amount of risk when you take yourself out of your isolated home environment, but I think we can do it safely, and I would not miss my chance to go.
I know it's tough to make plans at the moment, but what do things look like for you in late April to, say, the end of June this year?
Nothing can be reality until you're actually on the ground right now. So we're planning to be in Europe on April 13th to race a few UCI races in Europe before the World Cup round. So Andrew and I will go over to Switzerland, ideally. Athletes right now with negative COVID tests, professional athletes right now have exemptions for travel within a lot of European countries. So it looks like we're going to be able to get over there, do a few races to try to turn that brain back on because it feels so distant, and then race the first two World Cups. And then because of COVID, we're not able to come home in between World Cup rounds because of quarantines, and also just don't want to travel more than we have to. So we'll stay over in Europe until the Olympics pretty much.
That is it's like an undertaking you just can't do lightly. You have to commit so much. You know, you go over and you stay over. So I hope it works out. I hope everything goes smoothly for you this season. And then I hope we're in touch as the season goes on. Haley, thank you so much for your conversation and just your candor and your honesty. It always strikes me every time I speak with you how articulate you are about so many tough issues. And yeah, thank you so much for making this time.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for your very insightful questions. And you made me think, and I did a little bit of soul searching even on this call. So thank you.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks, Matthew.
And that's the episode. It's written and edited by me, Matthew Piaro. I had a lot of help from mountain bike web editor Terry McCall. He is so dialed into Canada's mountain bike scene. Check out his writing at the Canadian MTB website. I also had help from web editor Lily Hanson-Gillis. The Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast is produced by Adam Killick. He composed the music too. Thanks to Ontario Creates for its support. And thank you for listening. Please rate and review the show, ride safely, and I'll talk to you later.